Right, thanks for coming on today. What we're going to be doing is a complete breakdown in a fair amount of detail on both the Siu Nim Tao and the Chum Kiu forms. The reason I've chosen to do them together and not one at a time is because there's an integral link between the two forms that carries through all your training, and without both of them you can't really appreciate what Wing Chun has to offer. But if you understand Siu Nim Tao and Chum Kiu, you have nearly 90% of what you'll ever need for any situations you're likely to encounter, except the very extreme ones, in which case the beauty form is there to help you guide yourself through those problems, and the wooden dummy is there in the middle to connect them all together. So Siu Nim Tao, first of all, if we look at that and where I need to jump from one to the other, I'll make it very clear what I'm doing. Siu Nim Tao form, the way my teacher liked to interpret it, is not small idea or small thoughts like a lot of other Wing Chun teachers call it, which is a very literal translation, but he would choose to call it young idea. And the reason he chose to make it a young idea is because he used to compare it to a child. When a child is born, it's a small, empty vessel waiting to learn. And with the right sort of nurturing, the right education, the right training, you can get that child to reach all sorts of incredible potentials. And Wing Chun is the same. And the Siu Nim Tao form is that child, it's that basic seed that we're going to nurture, water, care for, and turn into something quite magnificent. The idea Nim Tao, the second part of the word Siu Nim Tao, that Nim Tao means an idea, a thought, a belief, a consideration. So it's got a lot of connected meanings that have a lateral way of looking at the whole concept. And Siu Nim Tao is the basic one. Now, if you like, you can consider Siu Nim Tao form is a bit like the English alphabet. It's the ABCs. So for Wing Chun, it's the little stepping stones that lead you towards an idea that's going to become something more profound as you understand it a bit better. So it's got all the basic techniques that you need for all your training in Wing Chun, except the most obvious things from the Biuji form, which are uniquely different. But even those Biuji techniques that are different have an origin in the Siu Nim Tao form, in some ways because they're a direct opposite to what the ideas are in the Siu Nim Tao form. And I'll try to make that even more clear as we go along. As for Chum Kiu means literally to search for, to look for a bridge or a connection. So if you summarize the two forms in as far as what their differences are, Siu Nim Tao is the ABCs. That's simple letters and maybe a few very short words. Chum Kiu is like sentences and phrases. It takes those ABCs and creates little word patterns that are easy to follow. And another way of looking at it is Siu Nim Tao form is very much a one-dimensional idea. If you compare it to what's always a very good example, that I believe anyway, is when you're shooting at a target, whether it be with a slingshot, an air rifle, or a shotgun, or whatever you're using, you usually start by hitting something that's stuck on the wall or stuck on a tree. It's not moving, you're not moving. You might be standing, you might be sitting, you might be lying down, but you're not going anywhere and the target's not going anywhere. So everything in Siu Nim Tao happens directly in front of you. And all the movements, with very few exceptions, are guided towards a point directly in front of you. Chum Kiu, on the other hand, is like a three-dimensional form. It incorporates changes in position, height, width, depth, direction. So it's a more three-dimensional concept because you've got to find the bridge. You've got to go out and look for it. It's not going to just appear in front of you. So the two principles that are really important that my teacher always mentioned when trying to understand the difference between Siu Nim Tao and Chum Kiu is Siu Nim Tao is referred to as Chiu Ying, which means facing or being square to the target, whereas Chum Kiu is called Zui Ying, which means chasing or finding, looking for. Right? So when we're doing Chum Kiu form, we're learning how to take our basic techniques and apply them into a real three-dimensional active situation. But when we're doing Siu Nim Tao, we're just worried about ourselves, standing in one place, worrying about one target and one target only. So we don't have to worry about if he's going to move here or there, if he's going to be high or low. It's all one simple concept that you can easily adapt to. Now, the idea with the form is that it's all constructed in ways that make things easy to both remember as well as train. So we have, first of all, when you do the form, your basic stance. Before we do anything else, we make the stance. Not because we're going to fight from this stance, but because this is the basis of every kind of movement you're ever going to make with your feet, including kicking, because it's only a short step away from the stance to making a basic heel kick. The basic shape of the leg and everything else is the same. Plus, this gives us a position from where it's easy to kick at close range. If you're standing with your feet out like that, you can't kick properly. But if you've got your toes turned inwards, whether it's in an attacking or a retreating stance or in the neutral stance, it's very, very easy to raise your legs, especially when you're at very, very close range to someone. So if I'm within Chiusal range, if I'm standing like that, I won't be able to raise my feet. But if I practice from this stance, it's quite easy to be able to bring my feet up because the musculature works in your favour and not against you. More important than that though, an even bigger consideration is that when you're making this stance, it's trying to teach you by example every single time you make it to keep your feet the same width apart all the time. Well, whether I'm advancing, retreating, shifting to the side, pivoting, whatever I'm doing with my footwork, it's always in reference to the basic stance. So that way, if you set it out properly, if you measure your stance according to your body frame, by just dropping, toes out, heels out, straight up and down, no rocking backwards and forwards, you have set the perfect distance between your heels. So that any time you then start practicing in motion, you're reminding yourself to have that distance between your feet, not wider or closer. If it's wider, your centre of gravity is too deep, you can't lift your feet up, you can't move properly. If it's closer, your balance is too narrow, it's easy to lose your balance. But if you have the right distance, if you're always working in reference to your basic stance, then you'll find that it's easy to kick, it's easy to step in any direction, it's easy to change feet because your centre of gravity is nicely balanced over a very, very easily mobilised base. Another thing is that when we're turning the toes and knees in, what we're doing is effectively creating a third leg. There's actually a tripod being created here, even though we don't physically have the third leg. What's happening is by pointing everything in towards the centre, it's creating a stable point of my stance. If I move in this direction, that point is still being created here because of the direction of the knees and the toes. So there's no stance, we don't put the feet like this because if the feet are like this it can collapse in the middle. It's even worse if you turn the foot out, it'll definitely fall down. But by having the toes running in parallel directions and the knees bending towards the centre, there's always a stability there. So even if the fight is going on for a bit longer than you'd hope and you're getting tired, you're not likely to fall out of your stance. Because if you start getting lazy with your stance and stepping with your feet in different directions, you could well lose your balance, be dragged out of your stance or just simply fall. Your knees will collapse. But this way, they can't collapse any further than the shape that you've made. And as another very important consideration, having the feet turned in at the front when you're advancing or retreating is effectively protecting your groin straight away because your knee is already near the centre. So if something tries to get through there, it's only a matter of lifting your leg and you've crossed the centre, so you've covered it. Whereas if you stand with your toes straight ahead, as some Wing Chun schools will want to do, you physically have to bring your knee across, which is going to be a slower action. This way it's already there. More importantly, if you're at leg contact range, so if someone's rushed towards you and you've shifted out the way and you've kept your toes in this direction, you're very likely to be able to catch their leg with your leg. Right, so maybe if Roger you can be my first volunteer. So what I mean by that is, of course, if he's rushing towards me trying to hit me and I shift out of the way, that automatically presents a lock for his leg. So if he tries to now do anything with his leg, I can feel that through my leg and take advantage of it and control his stance. Whereas if I'm getting into the habit of stepping without worrying about that, so I move out of the way and I lift my foot over here, well, he can break my stance immediately because there's no control over his forward leg. So at close range, that's a very, very essential thing to consider. Likewise, if you come back again, if I've got my leg in this position and he does try to lift the kick up, all I've got to do is just raise my knee slightly. You can see how it blocks it out. He can't reach my groin. The worst that will happen is he may clip me across the leg as it goes through. So that's a minor irritation. But if I'm standing like this, you can all see what's going to happen. Now, I've had my kids, so I don't really worry so much about that, but most of you are still planning on your children and your grandchildren, so you have to watch out for that sort of thing. So already, in just a couple of minutes, all I've done is describe the basic stance, yet already there's so many things to consider. The good thing is you don't have to be consciously thinking of them all the time, because the way that it's structured, it's already happening. Every now and again, it's good to stop and think, now, how should I be doing this to get the most out of it? But the brilliant thing about this is whoever those who were in the past who designed this system, they'd already incorporated all those things that you need to know in the basic practice. So every time you do your stance, make sure that you're doing your stance. That's why there's no time where we say it's got to be X amount of degrees or X amount of centimetres or inches between the heels. You've got to make it suit you. But the basic principle is lower your knees as far as they can naturally go. You can't go lower than that, even if you want to. That's it. If you've got your legs together, that's as far as they're going to go. And I've done that without bending the body, just straight down. Then push out to whatever's right for you so that it fits your frame. If you're a bigger person, you may need a deeper stance. If you're a smaller person, you may not need a deeper stance. It'll in the end be determined by the length of your legs, your weight, your size, and so forth. But as long as it fits into the parameters set out in the form, you can't be wrong. When you want to start moving, then you might need to make slight adjustments, because for some people, no matter how perfectly they think they've got this part, when they do turn, it just feels like it's either still too far away or still close. So you just adjust accordingly. None of us are perfect. We're not built like machines, we're all different. So you've got to find your personal stance within the framework. And that's what Siu Nim Tao is. It's a framework of ideas. Remember, the way we look at Wing Chun is a concept martial art, not a technique martial art. I don't want to make my technique sit the situation. I want my concepts to adapt, because concepts can change more readily than any set technique can. So all we're doing now is saying this is a framework for footwork. Use it, adapt it, make it the way that works best for you. But if it's not working, come back to the stance in the form and try and figure out what you're doing that's not allowing it to work as well as it can. And so if we set all the angles and positionings correctly, things should start working in the stance. One that's overlooked quite often, and it's very important of course, is to tuck the hips in, at least slightly. You don't have to shove your groin up towards your chin. Some people try to bend it so far back you think they're trying to crawl inside their own body. Right? But you also don't want to stand with your backside out. Years before I did Wing Chun, I practiced a style called Siu Nim Tao Section. And that was before I knew much about Wing Chun. And the instructor there used to always criticise Wing Chun. And he used to say, oh, they're the spastic nun style, because they stand there like this. Well, clearly he'd seen someone doing a stance and probably didn't understand it and just over-exaggerated. He also used to say that if you want to get your stance right, because even in Siu Nim Tao Section it was a similar idea with the hips, even though the stances were deeper, he said you should always push the hips forward in what he used to call model's crutch. Like when you're walking down the beach and you've got your socks down your drawers and you're trying to impress the girls. And not, he used to say, the peacock's ass. Right? In other words, you don't tuck your butt out, you got to tuck it in. But always, again, find what works best for you. And the best way to test it is with a partner, get them to put a bit of pressure on your stance and see which angle makes you the most stable. And you'll find if you've tucked in slightly and you're bending your knees in towards the centre, creating that triangle, that tripod effect, you can absorb a lot of pressure on the stance before it gets physically susceptible to collapsing. But also keeping in mind that we want our stance to be deliberately collapsible. I don't want stances like other styles that are, you can't push me over stances. Or, you can't knock me back stances. Because if that's the case, that's like a brick wall waiting to get hit by a truck. It will collapse. You want your stance to be stable, but collapsible if it needs to. And that's how this is designed, so that if there's too much pressure on the stance, because the hips and the knees and the shoulders are aligned correctly, as soon as there's too much pressure, it will collapse into something that you can make good use of. Your side-stepping action, your toe up. So every time you're making the stance when you do the form, don't just go, okay, get in the stance, I'll worry about the hand techniques. Worry about the stance. Go through it slowly. Don't be in a hurry. Set it properly. And make sure that you're collapsing straight down into a good stance, tilting the hips, setting the balance as low as you can get it. Now, once we've done the stance in the form, then we start doing what usually gets referred to as the opening movements. And they consist of a means of assessing where the center line is in two directions, vertically and also horizontally with a punching action. When we're doing that, we're not doing any defense against a low kick or a high punch. A lot of people interpret it as upper blocks and lower blocks. These actions are very simply finding where the center is, so that I'm not moving off in angles other than what is directly in front of me. It's all about retaining that concept of squareness. So when I bring the hands down, I'm finding the lower end of the vertical line that I'm trying to protect. And when I bring them up along the same plane, I'm looking at the upper level of that area that I'm trying to protect, which is basically this area here in front of me. My vital organs, the part of my body that needs the most protection, sits in that range. A couple of hidden ideas are in there as well. When you do the lower action, your arms are virtually straight. They're not locked out rigidly and should never be, but they're pretty much extended most of their length. And that tells you that all lower defensive actions, whether it be saw sao, lower bong sao, gan sao actions, any of those involve an extension of the arm to cover the distance down to that point. Whereas when you bring the hands up, the elbows are bent, because most of our upper defensive actions, like tan, ja, ja, even park sao, once it's done its job, drops back to the centre, all those shapes, even bong sao, which is an obvious one, the arms are bent, they're not locked out. Another thing that's there without perhaps realising is that we're not going past the width of our own body, because anything that's outside the width of my body is not a danger, not a direct danger. So there's no need to be blocking out here. I'm reminding myself nothing needs to go past my shoulders. Hence later on when we do the park sao actions, they stop there, they don't keep going. We don't do things defensively outside that range. If I need to go outside the width of my body, then I'll compensate by turning the body. So I'll physically turn my stance into the attack. I won't stick my arm out sideways, because this is a weaker posture. But if I'm facing, if everything's always square to my hips and shoulders, you have a stronger structure. So when you're doing this action, keep in mind what's going on. I'm finding where my centre is. That's as low as I'm going to block with my hands. Anything below there, I'll either get out the way or I'll incorporate my legs in the defence. Up here, that's telling me bent arms are the best defence. A reasonable distance off the body, which is the same distance as the lower position anyway, no wider than my stance. People used to like to say it's like when you're doing mathematics at school and the teacher draws a line and wants you to find the centre. So the old trick used to be get a compass and you make an arc on one side and then you make an arc at the other end, and where those two half circles cross, that's the centre. Then you draw a line through there, and that's where you've divided that line. So that's what we're doing. This is just two compasses and I'm finding my centre. Simple as that. Having understood the vertical centre, the form then introduces us to the horizontal centre line, which is when we punch along this line. Now, we're not actually doing a punch when we do that, although it takes the guise of the punching action. The first time we do a real punch in the form is not until the end. All we're doing here is using this as a means of understanding the shortest distance between 2 points. Right, but we're still setting the basic requirements of a punch in doing it, because we've got the elbows down, we're not popping the elbows out, the shoulders are down, not up. I'm deliberately bending my wrist downwards so the face of the knuckles is always facing the target. Otherwise people will tend to chop downwards or artificially try to re-establish a wrist position. If I start with the wrist already bent down, so the knuckles of my hand are already facing forwards, by the time I'm extending my line, the wrist is being stretched exactly in the way that I want it to work naturally in the punch. And most of you, if you relax your hands completely and just snap your elbows forward, you'll find there's a natural tendency for that to happen anyway. All we're doing in our training is enhancing it, so it becomes a very crucial part of getting a little bit more power at the end. So the wrist is stable but flexible in that rotation, so there's a whipping action in the punch when you actually strike. And you can see what happens when it's extended. It means that the shape of this bone is reflected through the stance. So the returning forces that come back when you strike something are going down and not back through your shoulder. So we're, again, fine-tuning little things that have to be consciously aware of it, just by doing a simple thing as checking the shape of your wrist before you throw the punch, and not having it like that, or even worse, like this. A lot of people who do it, just even do it this way, and their fist is actually coming out sideways. Instead of face it forwards, keep your elbow down, and punch from here, from the elbow. So if you look at it from the side view, the elbow is actually rising as it extends. So it's creating triangles again, because there's the other end of the triangle. It starts, if you draw a line, there's the base. This is now the hypotenuse in reverse, for those who remember their high school maths. And there's the other side of the target. So I'm creating triangles everywhere, and it's reflected in the stance as well. So everywhere you look in our technique, we're looking for triangles. All our basic moves create triangles or pyramids, if you prefer to call them that, which offer natural strength and support. So you don't have to be physically a huge person to get power. Now, when we're doing the punching action, like I said, don't think of this as, oh, I've got to punch as hard as I can. Do it naturally and gently and just stretch it all out. And we lock it, so that then when we open the hand and do the circling action, slowly we're getting the benefit that we want to get from it, which is to increase the flexibility and strength in both the forearm and the wrist. Because I don't know how many of you have ever considered it, but when you actually hit somebody, when your fist or your palm collides with somebody's head or body, the worst part of that technique for you is at the point of impact, all that energy is going back into your wrist. It's the weakest joint closest to the attack. So if you don't have a very stable wrist, if it isn't strengthened and the forearm's not developed to support it, you could buckle and do some damage to yourself. Sometimes if you've been working the bags, you've come up and gone bang, and it's bent, and it's like, oh, gee, that hurt, don't want to do that again. That's because you haven't got the wrist in the right line. So it's easy to experiment with and try at different angles, and you pretty quickly, without trying too hard, realise it's safer to keep it straight. And to make it stronger, we're constantly, through all our forms, doing this action. Now, it always concerns me when I see other Wing Chun people, they do their forms and they go, little tiny flick, big hurry, like we have to get somewhere else. Take your time, open it, stretch it, turn it as far as you can. So you start to feel it working through your muscles in your forearm. Then you're getting some benefit from it. Whenever we do the circling action with a straight arm, it's 100% for the exercise value. Whereas when we do it in other sections of the form where it's done as a bent arm, it's also a consideration for application. Getting around a limb, changing positions, being able to redirect your opponent's energy. But even then, when we do it with a bent arm, we're still building up the strength. We're just doing it in a way that is more close to the application that we expect to use it for. Once we've done that on both sides, left and right, we've now come to what is now the opening of the first section of the form. So we've set the stance, we've defined the center line, we've understood how to make sure our technique is traveling in a straight line to the same target all the time, had a shot at strengthening our wrists and forearms so when we start hitting things we're going to be better prepared. Now we start the nitty-gritty stuff. And the very first thing we do is the Tansal. Now if you understand the terminology, you'll find that you'll get a much better appreciation of what you can get out of the technique. Tansal generally, as a word, Tan means to spread out or spread over. Sao is the hand, but by extension in Cantonese it also refers to the whole arm, particularly from the elbow down. So Tansal is using this shape with your forearm and your hand to spread your opponent's energy to the sides. So what that means very simply, while Enzo's on camera, we thank him for lending us his skill. Right, let's do it on this side so you can see what's happening. If we compete for the centre at this shape, so Enzo's got a vertical shape, I've got a vertical shape, it's going to be a question of strength. He might be able to push me out the way, I might be able to push him out the way, depending on who's stronger. But if I change this shape, so as he tries to go forward, I turn that over and keep it low, it's flattening the shape of the bones so it spreads his energy out this way. So it's less of a competition. If I try to keep going straight, he will push me off the centre because I'm hitting his energy head on. But if we do it again and I change the angle, it spreads his force like spreading butter on the bread. It goes out to the sides. On the inside it's the same thing. We use the good arm. So again, if he wants to get through there and I do it this way, he will win because his shape is a superior one. But if I change that shape and spread his energy, it goes very easily to the side. There's no muscle being used there in the big way. It's just enough muscular action to retain the right shape. Mostly it's the bones that are creating that angle. So by shifting the shape of the bones, you're getting a different kind of energy and it makes his arm shift off the center line. Now in the long term, that's the main purpose of Tansal, to suppress power so that you can shut down particularly things like round punches. But in this part of the form, we're not doing the Tansal as a fighting technique straight away. What we're trying to do instead is still retain the idea of defining the center, but more importantly, it's the beginning of what we call learning La Cao Jie Tong. Literal translation, when the hand is free of pressure, it snaps or thrusts forwards. Now, that's why we're doing this slowly, because even my teacher would laugh when people say, oh, if you're doing your form like that, how can you fight like that? You just laugh, you say, you don't fight like that. Same as Tai Chi people, when they practice their form, it's very slow and very gentle. But if you ever see a Tai Chi person fighting, they're not slow and gentle. It's one of the most brutal martial arts I've ever seen in my life. Just unfortunately not many good instructors of that system around to teach the fighting side. Wing Chun is no different. Just because I'm standing here moving in slow motion is not to imply I'm going to try and fight in slow motion. I can't. Nobody can. If you're punching at me at 100 miles an hour and I'm trying to stop it by doing this, of course your punch will land a long time before my Tan Sao gets there. So there's got to be another reason, and that reason is we want to develop springy hands or springy energy in the hands so that when there's a point of contact and it's suddenly lost, your hands automatically start attacking. But not just going anywhere, going to the center, hitting the target that's the weakest target to attack at that time. So when you're doing this action, the important thing is to remember that your elbow is driving your hand and your forearm forward. The hand isn't pulling the arm out. The elbow is doing all the work. It's pushing in and forwards constantly. For those who are able to get the center as the very center of the body, that's brilliant for you. It doesn't mean that those who aren't going to do the technique well. It just means you have an added advantage that you have greater access to the center. So your flexibility is good. But when you use Tan Sao, keep in mind it isn't done in the center. When you use Tan Sao, it's always done off center. Because if the Tan's in the middle, you can't get your attacking hand in the middle either. So one of them's got to give way. When we actually do the technique, say for example I'm defending with a pivot and a Tan Sao with a punch, my Tan Sao actually follows the line that my body is now taking as it's turned. My attacking hand travels the original center. I don't put them both in here, or I certainly don't put them both over there. Two different lines in application, but in practice, one line. Reason for it? Very simply, if I prime my elbows to get as close to the middle as possible, it enhances the ability to get that springiness in your arms. Whereas if you get a raw beginner and say, okay, I'm going to test his springiness, and his elbow's out here, he won't spring to the center. But by pushing him in here, it creates a situation where the springiness is more likely to occur. Now I'll demonstrate what I mean. If he's got a Tan Sao shape happening here, but I want him to tense his arm up and make it rigid, and I push down on it, and he resists as hard as he can the opposite direction, this is going to be natural to most people, it goes that way. It's Newton's third law, which we all probably know quite well these days, because we hear it all the time in training, that for every action, in this case my action is going down, there's at least almost equal and opposite reaction, which is his hand wants to go up. That's nature. You can't change that entirely, but you can modify it. It's like behavior. You can modify a person's behavior with time and practice and patience if you've got children. So what happens here, see the bare skin makes it a little bit more obvious. If he's in the middle, but he's still using a bit too much force, it will still go up. It will never go directly straight across. He will not get that reaction. But the more he learns to relax and to use structure, not strength, it still goes this way as well as that way. So it might change elevation by a few degrees, but it mostly goes here. Now, if we train this properly, not only will he be able to do it if I press down on it when it's in a good position, it'll go forward, but even if he's in a bad position and I press down on it, it'll still have a tendency to come back. Whereas again, if I'm pushing that way and he's resisting with the normal shoulder and chest muscles, of course it'll go there. He'll knock out his best friend instead of knocking out me. This is where we want him to go. So by starting in here, which provides a perfect triangular shape, there's one line and there's the other line. This is making a triangle. There's another triangle being formed in here. So everywhere you look at this, there's a triangle happening. So when pressure is applied, it wants to react this way and not other directions. And the same thing happens when we do the futsal position. Again, with the elbow in here, if I put resistance outwards on that, if he uses his shoulders to resist, use strength, it'll go sideways. But if he uses relaxation and allows me to push him down and load it up, he comes back. If he allows me to really push hard and he just keeps it loose, give me some springiness, it comes back as hard as I push. So the more I load that up, the harder I get hit. And that's probably about as many as I want to take for a minute. And you can see that it's because he's learning by making the shape to switch off these muscles and start thinking about his tricep and his elbow. And that's why we're doing the form in slow motion, to shut down all the normal reactions and create some new ones. Thanks, Rudy. It's a little bit like, I always use the example, normally when I'm trying to explain these ideas to people, when you have your laptop computer and it blows up on you, you take it back to the techs technicians, and they re-image your hard drive. In other words, they take everything off it, make it all blank, and then they reload the programs back in. What we're doing when we're doing Siu Nim Tao form is we're re-imaging our ideas about combat. By slowing down, by learning how to relax, and by moving slowly, we're redefining in our minds, as well as our bodies, the sort of reactions and ideas that we want to develop for our training. Now, I started to say before that if your elbow's not able to reach the centre, it's not a huge disadvantage. And that's absolutely true, as long as you follow one really important piece of advice, which a lot of Wing Chun schools don't seem to recognise. What happens is some people just can't, for whatever reason. Maybe they have a short upper arm, which is possible. Maybe they have a lot of muscle at the sides and in the shoulders, and they just can't get into the middle. Everything's just too tight. That's not a problem, so long as whatever point you can reach in towards the centre, you make your tansal come off at 90 degrees to that line. Don't let your tansal run across. If your tansal's lying across the line, then you're not going to get a forward spring. It's going to tend to want to go out this way. But by putting it in a straight line, it's more likely to spring forwards for a start. More importantly, like when I demonstrate against Enzo's technique, if I was to allow my arm to go side on, he will push it out the way very, very easily. But by pointing it where I want it to go, directing the energy helps the energy get to where it needs to be. So when you're doing your form, if you're one of those guys who just can't get your elbows in the middle, just make sure you've got 90 degrees happening off your chest. So if it's right in the middle, great. If it's a little bit further out, make sure it's still square. Even further out, just still make sure it's square. But as much as possible, get it as close to the centre as you can every time you practice it, so that we're enhancing that spring. Now, when we do the tansal, we only go to 3/4 of our reach. That's normally defined by two things. One is the obvious visual reference, about 3/4. It's always about, it's not exact. More importantly, it's when you start to feel the shoulder muscles beginning to work. There's a certain amount of movement there where the shoulders are not doing much. But when I get to a certain point, muscles in the side of the shoulder and the front of the shoulder start to activate more. And if I keep going forward, what they will do is they'll pull the elbow away. So we want to go only as far as I start to feel that happening, and that's where I stop. An important consideration being that our best range for combat is within that 3/4 range, because we've got most control there. Anything outside of that range, we lose the effective control that we had. So from there in is fine, but from about 3/4 of the way out, it starts to get a bit 50-50, and you don't want 50-50. You want to always keep it as much as possible, 100% your way. We circle again, as before, for the strength training of the wrist, but now also for the fact that at close range you can often use that to change position, especially if you've made a mistake. If Roger and I have collided, but I've ended up on the inside of his hand. Now this is a very dangerous place to be, because not only is this hand still a very obvious threat, I'm now exposed to the potential of being hit from this side, whether it's high or low, it's still a consideration. So the last place I want to be is there, so the best thing to do is then use it to get to the outside, to use Hien-so and Gan-so and change. I might be trying to get in here and he's pushing outwards trying to beat me, so there's an occasion where I can use that circle to get him off that line, just by letting his energy go, and it draws him into this side. So the harder he resists that one, the more he's going to get hit with this one. It might be that he's hanging onto my arm. He's grabbing me, he's trying to be a smart aleck. Now I can pull away from that all day and I'm not going to get anywhere. But if I just do a little tiny action with my wrist, suddenly he can't hang on. No strength required. Hang on hard. Just a little bit of a turn, and he has to let it go because all the pressure's going on the little finger and the thumb of the wrist. So rather than trying to struggle, something subtle. And every time we're doing this action, it's helping us to remember that's the potential for it. Once we've done that, we then come to the most important defensive technique we probably have in some respects, because every time we meet with someone's energy, there's a chance that they're going to be stronger than us and we can't meet their energy head on. We can't afford to. We need to know how to yield and give that energy somewhere to go. This shape, Wu-Sao, provides a perfect way of understanding the principle of yielding. No matter how strong the person is, you'll have enough strength in your arm to maintain a position in front of his pressure, but still be able to keep him out without collapsing back onto your body. If you follow a couple of very simple things, which are to make sure the hand is vertical, not less or more than vertical, and to make sure your elbow is, if you look at the form from the front, is directly below your shoulder. You see a lot of people in Wing Chun do this. Their elbow is outside the shoulders. Well, that means that they're trying to use the muscular strength of the bicep and the forearm to push out. Whereas if they were to drop their elbow, they're using the strength of the whole body to resist. And your whole body is much stronger than any particular muscle group in your arm. And the height is also important. If you're doing the defensive action in front of your face, it's a little bit like the Three Stooges. When Mo does that and Larry does this, Mo just goes around the corner and pokes him. Well, even worse, if that's a punch coming towards your head and you stick your hand up there, it's just saying, here I am, come and hit me. What we want to do is get that attack to go somewhere else. So by bringing the hand back on a low line, not a high line, it sends the energy down here. We effectively feed the force towards the floor. Now, if you come back greater than vertical, you create another weakness in the elbow. So that will collapse quite easily. Less than a vertical, same sort of situation, it collapses because there's no linking of the joints. But the moment you make the wrist sit in the center, level with the rear hand, and this elbow is below the shoulder and the arms are both muscles in the arms are relaxed, you get a natural spring. Now that's a crucial thing in Wing Chun because in a lot of other martial arts, they're very one hand at a time. They defend with one, they attack with one. They defend with one, they attack with one. It's always a 1-2 type of movement. Their rear hand is a very passive defense. What we want in Wing Chun is a very active defense. I want that hand to be alive all the time so that it can be used as an attack but also be a very effective guarding hand. It's no good if I'm throwing a punch with this hand, I just take this one away. Better that this hand is out here just in case something gets past this one. So there's still like having a fence around you just in case things slip past your main technique. You've got a secondary one. It's like a second parachute, if you like. The main chute is doing the big work, but this rear hand is there just in case things go wrong. Fingers should be pointing straight up and down, and thumbs need to be tucked out the way. They don't have to be wedged into the middle, because that's just stiffening up your arm. But at least get used to tucking them to a safer place. Because in the combat situation, the last thing you need to be thinking about is, oh, is my thumb in the right place? Things are happening too quickly to be concerned about that. That needs to be there already. That's got to be a habit. So to create the habit, check it in the form. Fingers, not stiff, because that means tightness in the muscles and it's going to collapse. As long as they're naturally as straight as they can be without being rigid. So always work within a naturalness in your form. If it doesn't feel relaxed, then it's not the right technique. So even the Tan Sao is not stiff like this, even though you see other people doing it that way. It's firm, but there's softness inside it. Best way to understand it is like a steel bar wrapped in cotton wool. So it's flexible on the outside, but it's nice and strong on the inside because of the bones. We're using skeletal strength, not muscular strength. And with Wu Sao it's the same. When it's coming back, it's relaxed and flexible, so that it will give if it has to. If the pressure is too strong for the hand, then the body will collapse. This is like an antenna, it's giving you some information. If you can't deal with it with your hand alone, use your body. Shift yourself out the way. When we're playing the Wu Sao, try to make sure that the height that you started with the Tan Sao, this wrist position out here, is the same height as the rear hand. And when you circle, it stays there. And when you're coming back, it remains on that line. It doesn't go up or down. It stays level with this one. Like I said, Venzo's trying to punch me in the face. The last thing I want to do is pull my hand towards my head. It shows him where I am. What I need to do is keep it down, so even if he's aiming for the head, it draws him away from my head. So he's punching towards there, but he can't get there. Because as he tries to, I'm maintaining the wrist position and it draws him down here. The moment I let it come up, he's in. Because all the triangles work against me and for him. But if I leave it down low and he tries to get in and I keep that shape, you can see it doesn't come back very far at all. He's trying to get through, but he can't get through. And I've only come back halfway. So why then do I do it all the way back in the form? Reason being, it's not because I want my Wu Sao to come all the way to here. It's because I want to be practicing my Fuk Sao from as far as possible. Because Fuk Sao needs to be able to be applied even with my hands right here. If there's a punch coming, I need to apply the concept of Fuk Sao from anywhere and not just from the perfect position. So when you're doing things in the form, not everything is black and white and exactly what you see. The form says do the Wu Sao all the way back. But in application, no way. It stays there. I don't need it to come right back. I want it to be here and active so that when he pulls that hand away, this one will naturally want to follow it. That's also another form of Lat Sao Jig Tung. Lat Sao Jig Tung should occur from just about all your basic hand techniques. They all operate on that principle. So when you're coming back in the form, bring it right back to about a fist away. Sifu used to say that back in the days he trained with Yip Man, originally Yip Man would say 2 fingers from the body. And after a while he felt that people were just getting lazy and letting the hand come right back. So he changed it and told them make it a fist distance. Whether you hold your fist that way, doesn't matter. As long as there's a space in there, that for practice, don't let it get closer than that. In application, it's likely to stop a long way further out. Makes sense? Now, like I said, why? Because I want to practice my Fuk Sao from as far back as possible to perfect the concept to the extreme level. I want to be so good at the Fuk Sao that I can apply it from anywhere. So I start with the longest technique. Same as the first punch that we do anywhere in our training traditionally is this very long punch from chest to target. But will I ever punch like that in a fight? Not very practical, is it? Right? Better my hands can work from anywhere, but the concept remains the same. So with Fuk Sao, this is a concept. Don't mistake this one with Tan Sao. Tan Sao is a technique. It's also being practiced here to develop another concept, but Tan Sao is a physical technique that can be applied in combat, particularly, like I said, to deflect heavy round attack. But Fuk Sao is not a technique in the same regard. This is an idea being practiced through a piece of your body. So this is the tool to understand the idea. And this is a tool that has the handle as the most important piece. Some of you have heard the example before. If you went to Kmart or Coles or just a supermarket, you often find these amazing tool sets. 101 different tools for 101 different jobs. And there's all these little attachments in the box, but there's usually just one handle. And if the kids lose the handle on you, the toolbox is useless. It's a bit like a Sidchrome spanner set with one spanner. If you lose that spanner, you've got no tools left. So your Fuk Sao is like that magic handle in that special tool set. This is the part we're interested in, not what's happening out here, which is why we do it with a totally relaxed hand. I'm not worried about, will there be a fist? Will there be a palm? Should I use my fingers? Is it going to be my thumb? Am I going to pick up a brick? None of that matters. What matters is, do I have my handle in the right place to get the most out of this technique? And what am I trying to do when I do Fuk Sao? Is again, I'm trying to develop that springy energy. That's the first priority. But more importantly, most of the techniques we do in Wing Chun for attack and defense come from this shape. Your basic punch is the obvious example, but also your Jam Sao action, your Jat Sao action, even your Gan Sao action in a sense starts in this shape and changes into what it needs to be, but it begins with a contact on the inside of the arm and then alters that contact. So most of the things that we're going to be defending against, if we're assuming straight lines are the most common attack we're going to face in our practice at least, if not in the real life, are going to be using something like a Fuk Sao shape to deliver whatever's at the end. Take Park Sao. Your basic Park Sao defense is also a Fuk Sao idea, just with a different attachment out in front. It's a little bit like Mr. Han from Enter the Dragon. Right? So he's got the handle and he applies the right tool for the job. If you've seen Kentucky Fried Movie, there's a whole different idea involved there. I won't elaborate. You have to go and rent the DVD. Right, so when we're playing Fuk Sao, where most people make a mistake with this one is they try to do it all with the elbow. So they don't really worry about what the wrist is doing. And we see people have their wrists up at very high angles, sometimes extremely high. Because they think, oh, if I tuck my elbow in, I won't get hit. Well, that's a wrong idea. If he wants to come forward through here in a straight line at me, and I just tuck my elbow in and say, all right, you can't get me now, all I have to do is say, do your punch, and he will get through. Right, so punch, because it pushes me out. The reason being, Tan Sao is always the superior angle. It's stronger being that it comes from inside, it's underneath, so it's got lots of potential upwards from the floor, from the stance. If I'm sitting on top of that and I keep my elbow down but my wrist goes up, what I've done is effectively created a triangle that has no base. So his triangle pushes mine out the way. However, if I can keep my wrist forwards, even if my elbow's not on the center line, I can keep him out. Because it's the evenness of the pressure through the whole arm that is pushing him away. Fuk means bow down, or lay yourself prostrate on the ground, as if you're in front of the emperor or the queen and you're doing the royal business of showing respect. So what I want to do with Fuk Sao, what the name implies, is that as this energy is coming forward, I want to send his energy down there, like I'm going to make him bow down. The only way I'm going to get his energy to go down is if I keep my head, symbolically, going towards the floor. So my wrist represents where my head's going, which is heading in that direction. My elbow is the support. It's the hips of the technique. So as he tries to get in, I just send my energy towards him. So that now I've got the lower line in the triangle and it's pushing his energy away. Now clearly I'm not going to be able to always keep my wrist exactly the same place, because as this attack's coming forward, you see that the shape of the arm changes. This muscle group in particular starts to go higher. So of course there's going to be some movement upwards in my hand. I can't stop it going up completely, but I can control how far it goes. So no matter how much he wants to get in, so aim to go as high as you can. Try and push through, punch, that's it. What will happen is the stance will collapse if the hand can't cope. So if he actually steps with that and tries to step forward and punch, it activates my stance rather than relying on hand strength alone and pushing, because if he steps and I push, I'll get pushed out. This becomes a handle, like a door handle, and he easily opens the door. But if I relax the stance, relax the hand, and as he pushes on that one, it'll collapse me in such a way that I've still got the same line that I had before. I've just altered the angle that it's coming from. Right, thanks, Luke. Therefore, what we've got to be thinking about is not just where our elbow is, but where the wrist is. And this is the big difference that I've noticed watching other Wing Chun schools when they practice, that they're all obsessed with tucking the elbow in, and they forget the role of the rest of their forearm. Fuk Sao means the whole of your arm. It's not just referring to one piece, it's everything. So we've got to switch the hand off to make the muscles soft and spongy so we can actually feel what's happening. Keep the elbow lower than the wrist. So again, there's a bit of a triangle happening there. There's one line, there's the other line, and there's our base. So there's still basically a triangular shape all the time. If that gets too acute, it collapses, it's no longer a triangle. Hence the importance of keeping the wrist forward. Which is why, unlike Tan Sao, which needs to be kept at 90 degrees to the body to be most effective, Fuk Sao can work if your elbow can't get in, so long as your wrist is taking slack. It's another example is if you were playing football, soccer, say both because you might prefer one term over the other, and you're the goalkeeper and your midline and your back line have let you down, and now there's an attacker coming straight at you. There's just you, the net behind you, and this guy trying to kick a goal. If you wait on the line, he's got the whole goal to shoot at. But if you take a chance and you time it right and you come forward towards him, assuming everything works well, what you've effectively done is you've cut off his access to that line. He's got less of a view of the goal square, so he doesn't have a clean shot at the goal, and you've reduced the amount of distance you're going to have to travel to stop him coming in. Does that idea make sense? Whereas if I wait back here on the line, he's got whatever it is, the distance between the two posts, what is it?
80 yards.
No, between the two goal posts, what are they in soccer? It's a few metres anyway. Right, that's a big range of big target range to aim for. So he only has to send the ball off on a slight angle anyway, and he can probably get it past me. But as soon as I come forward, I'm reducing his visible access to that target. That's what Fuk Sao is doing. By coming forward, you're reducing your opponent's potential to extend, so that he can't use his full access of his power. It sends his power off to the side. Whether or not in the end you turn that into an attacking punch or palm, finger jab, chop, whatever it might be, the point is if you've got that line covered with the forearm and the wrist, then you've effectively reduced his access to your body so he can't hit you quite as easily. So don't worry about what am I going to hit the guy with when I'm practicing the form. Don't worry about that. That's not your consideration. Your consideration is, do I have my forearm relaxed? Have I got my elbow down to get access to the ground? Is my wrist forward to make sure that I've got lots of leverage working for me? And then extend as far as you can go, again, until you feel the shoulders start to kick in. Don't go beyond where it starts to pull the shoulder, because that takes your elbow further off the centre and you'll then lose your wrist position as well. Don't try to do a weird, wonderful shape with your hand. It's not stiff and straight, it's not curled back like a claw or hook. It's just hanging loosely. And one of the things I've found has helped me over the years to get the best technique in futsal is whenever I get back to a futsal and I drop the hand, I'll literally let it fall a little bit so that I can kind of feel my elbow just resting on my hip. And that's a reminder. Every time I do that in the form, that reminds me, send the energy from the hip. Not from the shoulders, but send it up, as if there's a connection that continues. Even though there's no physical contact, I'm imagining that bridge of energy from the ground through the hip and extending forwards. So that when you've got someone who's really, really strong, you won't try and push down with your arms, you'll instead sink in with your elbow. And that's what will keep him off the centre line. Remember too also, the height is crucial. Both the tan and the futsal shouldn't be higher, again, than the rear fist position. Now, this is quite a deliberate design in the form. We have the hands up there, and not like most other Chinese martial arts and a lot of the Japanese and Korean ones, where the hands are at the hips. Usually they practice their stance. Horse stance is a classical one you see, and there's always hands at the hips. When they punch, one hand always comes back to the hip. In Wing Chun, we don't come to the hip, we come here. Why? Because that is closer to the centre, and it's more an extension of the natural line of the technique. When a punch starts, the elbow's back here, and it drives up. I don't want my fist and elbow down. If my fist is at the hip, my elbow is higher than my fist. So I'm literally looping. It's going in a circle. Whereas if I've got my hand higher than the elbow, that's the line I want it to take. It's the direct line of transit between me and the target. So when I'm doing it in the form, whether it's tan or foot, I want to keep that same alignment. So if you look at it from the side, it's virtually the mirror end of this shape here. So the line follows through. It's not one up, one down, or opposite way. Pull back with the elbow down a little bit lower than the wrist, and this is the opposite. There's the elbow low, there's the wrist high. Now what that means is then that you're always trying to keep your opponent down to that level. You don't want to be always trying to aim to the head, particularly with somebody like a couple of tall guys in here. If I'm always aiming up towards the head, I'm going to get pushed out the centre. What I need to do is bring his hands down, because humans are not designed very well for this kind of action. We don't have a lot of strength that way. We're pretty good at pressing actions, but lifting actions are harder. That's why some of the hardest exercises in the gym are the ones where you've got to do things in that direction, because there's not a lot of stability at the top of the shoulder to get the strength there. Now that being the case, if someone's throwing a punch and you can knock them downwards, it takes their ability to lift their arm away from them. Whereas if you're always aiming high towards their head so they can always extend upwards, you're making it easier for them to get through. So like I did before when I had Luke here, I didn't go up towards him because he got through when I did that. I kept my hand down. So transplant that into a fighting situation. Right? Roger's out here, he's throwing a punch at me, and he's trying to hit me right on the nose. If I try and stop him by going for his head, you can see there's a pretty good chance he might get through, because I've created a line that suits where he's coming from. He's shooting from low to high, so there's his line of attack, and I'm going high as well, so the two colliding pyramids don't affect each other very much, except that it pushes me out of the middle, so it affects me badly, but it affects him very well. Whereas instead, if my aim is, even though I might physically want to smack him in the head, I'm going to be aiming my technique more at his chest. So it still caught him on the chin, but it was never aimed at his chin. It was actually aimed here, because my form has taught me to take that line. Whereas if I take a shot at his head, he's probably going to win, because this is, in essence, this is tansal. He's on the inside, so it's equivalent to a tansal shape. Whereas what I'm doing is a futsal, done badly. Tansal will always beat, should always beat futsal, because the angles are better. So the only way that the futsal can win over the tansal is to keep the line low and also change my angle. I don't come at him square on, I've shifted a little bit so that now my futsal can get its natural strength through that direct line. Plus, by trying to get his arms down, it's now difficult for Roger to lift his arm up again. He's going to find that difficult to raise his arms, whereas if I've got it up there, it's easy to raise his arms. Leverage is much better for him at that level. It's not very good for him at this level. So now if he wants to hit, it's hard to hit. Because with the elbow down here, I can hit and control. Now I can smack him in the head, because I've got him in my fighting area, and not this sort of business. If I start doing that, then even if he's got shorter arms, he's going to get in first. But the longest arms in the world can be slowed down by getting on top. using this shape. Once I've got one out of the way, the other one can slip in, and then you've got two fighting hands. And that's what the form is trying to tell you, but without physically doing the fighting action. Now, once we've finished those sequences, we then finish off the form with three very simple movements, but they're quite important ones, particularly the next one. From the last Wursal position that we make, we Pak Sao, or slap the hand straight across the body. And that's the important word, it's straight across. The body's not square, the body is actually slightly rounded across the chest. So as a result, a lot of people tend to want to go around the corner. They tend to follow the line of their body. In some Wing Chun schools, they teach you to go out and up, or down and low. What we always want to do is just go straight across. The reason being, when I go straight across, I'm preparing the arm action to match the stance when I actually apply the technique. And what I mean by that is, everything in Siu Nim Tao form is standing still. I'm not moving. So I've got to use my imagination as much as I'm using my body to make the ideas make sense. I want to practice Pak Sao, but I also want to understand another concept at the same time. So the designers of the form very cleverly said, put the Pak Sao in there as a sideways action, not because we're going to use it necessarily sideways, but because it's an introduction to changing your stance. Because when I do turn to my left, or if I'm going the other way, turn to my right, that means that my Pak Sao action is actually following the straightest possible line. It's actually making sure my elbow is down and my forearm is running in line with my stance, so that the Pak Sao is a strong one. If I go around the corner, then of course by the time I turn, my Pak Sao is going sideways. It's no longer going where it needs to go, which is straight ahead. So without having to actually move, you're still training a very basic idea. And it makes it less boring, because if the punch has already gone straight, and then I come to here and I do a Pak Sao straight, a lot of people would miss the connection. What's different, what's the same about them? So this just makes it a little bit more obvious that there's something special to consider. Also, it's in keeping with what we said at the start of the form. I'm not going past the width of my body. So the Pak Sao stops when I reach the shoulder. I don't keep passing outside that range. But having said that we're practicing for a straight line, which is the way we normally do it in practice and on the dummy, it's also got another idea incorporated in there, and that is, if I've made contact with someone's limbs using Pak Sao, and I want to get in, because obviously when I make contact, my goal is to get in to finish the attack, I can't afford to take that hand away, because that would give him the potential to hit again. So what I can do, particularly against a taller opponent, is keep that hand in the contact position and move my stance inwards, so that this hand's actually, it's still sitting where it was, and I'm moving my body in on that hand position, so that now my opponent's weapon is now outside the range of my body. Now if you can't see that, obviously because I'm doing it on my own, nice and easy, Daniel. You need a tall person, so I'll get the tallest one here. Daniel's thrown a shot at my head. He's gone for a headshot. Alright, he's shooting out like a boxer, it's a cross, and I've intercepted with Pak Sao. Now, I could try to kick the guy, but maybe my balance isn't that good, and maybe I'm afraid if I lift my foot off the ground he's going to take advantage. So I figure, short of running away, best thing to do is get inside. But I can't afford to take that hand away now, because as I take that one away to throw the next punch, this one can still come back, or it can grab my arm and take me in a different direction altogether. So if I've done the Pak Sao, I've gotten rid of his first attack and managed to slow that one down. How do I get in? Leave that hand there and move in. Going low will then make him drop his hands, because he'll naturally want to protect his lower half, and then when his hands come down, then I've got access to the head, rather than straight away when he throws that punch try to hit him in the head, because he clearly has the advantage. If I'm aiming for his nose, well, his fist is a lot lower than mine, than his nose, so he can push me out straight away. But if his punch comes out and I've done a Pak Sao first, and then I move inside, it takes him off the line and gives me the ability to come in and finish him off. So if we stop there, and then Daniel steps out of the picture, and leaves me standing here, right, that's exactly what I've just done in the form. I go back to my stance, there it is. It's where it ends up. It's not where I wanted to go first, but it's where it finished up by the time I moved in. So it has different applications depending on the circumstances. One thing I haven't said already, and I should have said earlier, but it's not too late because it's relevant all the way through. All the Wing Chun names for the techniques, the terminology, being a teacher of languages, this is something that became very apparent to me a long time ago, and try to share it with you. All these names are verbs. And for those who find the word verbs threatening, they're action words. All right? doing words was the way I think I described when I was at school, primary school. In other words, they're all motions in progress. They're not fixed positions. When you tansao, it's not just that bit that you see in the photograph. It's everything that happened up to that bit. Fuksao is not just there. Fuksao is the entire range of motion involved in fuksao. Wursao is the entire action. Paksao is the entire action. They're all actions. So we're not sticking our hands out into a shape and saying that's such a technique. The journey to get to there is the technique. And this is where our Wing Chun again is different and differs greatly from a lot of the other interpretations of Wing Chun, because most of the other teachers seem to be obsessed with fixed positions, final shapes. And so they start fighting like robots trying to make the perfect tan, which is stiff and hard, instead of something alive that can change. So when you're doing your forms, try to keep that in mind when you're practicing any of your techniques with a partner on your own. They're actions in progress. They're happening, they haven't happened. And so when you're doing these motions, it's the journey of the technique that counts, not just when you reach the final destination. It's a little bit like your training. It's not whether or not you become the great Grand Master in the future, it's what you pick up along the way. Right? And so with your technique, think of it the same way. Don't think of it as, I'll make a tansao, which means I'm going to go and stick it there and expect it to survive. It won't. It'll be knocked away. But if my tansao is actively driving, or my paksao is actively snapping forward, that's where the job gets done, in the action, and not the final shape. Right. Now, after we've done that paksao action, we come back to the middle of the body and convert that hand into a vertical palm strike, which deliberately goes upwards and forwards, finishing up in front of the face. It's very rarely that we'll do anything that obscures our own vision, except if there's a good reason. And what's happening here is a concept that's being introduced to us, which gives us a good reason for doing it that way. This represents my hands being inside someone else's hands. Someone else is on the outside of my hands, trying to push me out the way, trying to attack me. If I am on the inside and my technique goes straight forward, their technique can still come over the top of mine and hit me. Right? So if I'm inside here, basically, although in the form it's done from here, it's representing the concept of tansao. I'm inside a fuksao shape. If my tansao tries to go straight forward, fuksao can beat it. How tansao beats fuksao is that it sends its structure slightly upwards as it goes forwards. So it's becoming more able to deflect the energy out. Roger's nodding his head because you can feel it happening. Right, so if he's going forward and I go straight forward, he will win, because he'll get the angle that I said not to get in form, that across the line angle. So I don't want to get it across the line, so how do I keep it stable? I send it out at 90 degrees to my body, and it slightly comes upwards, the elbow is raising, which is now creating a shape that beats the fuksao. Now, given that that's technically how it's working as two shapes that we recognise, put into a situation. We've collided, and my hand's inside Roger's. If he suddenly disengages, he's only disengaging for probably one reason. He's trying to hit me. He might be going around, he might be just shooting up towards my head, but either way, if he disengages, my natural reaction will be this. He tries to hit me, my natural reaction will be to follow it. Most people do that. But what happens is if I follow that hand, you still got another one. So I become a puppet and he's just pulling on the strings, making me go wherever he wants me to go. So what this is trying to encourage me to think about is that if I feel his hand changing shape and redirecting, I'll just go forward. You can see where my hand goes straight away, plus he can't get in. Now tansao has beaten fuksao. Yeah, I did wash my hands. Just kidding. Right, so this is what the potential is, what it's trying to show you, is that if you're inside someone's hands and they shoot at your head, don't try to control them, because your position is already better than theirs. Punch or palm strike. The reason the form's giving you the palm is to give you alternatives. Not just thinking about one idea, but there's another weapon. And shortly in the form, we're going to meet another weapon, edge of the hand. And later on, another weapon, an inverted palm, and so on. It's giving you a big range of tools for the toolbox, but all those tools are still coming off the same handle. So when I'm doing that paksao and I come back to the middle, I'm assuming a situation where my hands are inside his hands, and as he tries to attack, I take the line that protects me. By travelling upwards and forwards, the shape of my forearm is acting as a shield, so his energy is being sent sideways, and yours can get in. Now, if I was to do that with a horizontal palm, we go back again, it would work against me. I'll use this one because the right arm's dying at the moment. So if he does the same thing and I go horizontally, you notice he wins. Because when I've taken my hand over and tucked the hand on the side, that's effectively pushed my elbow right into the middle like futsal. So futsal can beat futsal. But by keeping it vertical, my elbow is now pointing down, not in, so futsal can't beat tarsal. So sometimes a little difference out here makes a major difference back here. It's a little bit like those of you who've ever owned a push bike. If you've ever had to fix a punch and you flip the bike upside down to fix it, when I was a kid I was a paper boy and forever getting punches. It was the bane of my existence as a teenager, because I always seemed to get a flat tyre and I was forever changing the tyres. But to take away the pain and to try and amuse yourself while you're fixing the tyre, you muck around with the bike while it's upside down because you can do crazy things with it. And one thing I noticed often is that the faster I span the wheel, it was almost mesmerising to notice that the hub wasn't really going anywhere. It just sits there and it seems to be moving in slow motion, yet the wheel's going furiously around, right? Because that's what's going on there. While I'm only changing one part of the shape a little bit, it has a dramatic effect on the other part. It's like the bicycle wheel in reverse, that there's a little change in the hub, but a dramatic change in what the elbow is able to do to protect me. Now I'm going to come back to that example later on when we talk about chum kill, because that applies there as well, but in the reverse effect. So never ever assume that it doesn't matter what shape your hand is. It matters a lot. In fact, even in the dummy form, a lot of people are doing one of the actions slightly incorrectly, because most people finish the dummy form each section with a vertical palm, whereas in fact the situation they're practicing for requires a horizontal one, simply because you're assuming on the outside, not the inside. So they're actually training the wrong shape if they do a vertical palm. Every time they come to the end of the section, they do this one. A lot of people are doing this one. Because it should be this one. Because what's happening here is I've got to the side of somebody's arm, so to control him, I need to tuck my elbow in. And the best way to tuck my elbow in is to turn my hand over. So sometimes one idea will help you see a whole lot of other things you might be doing incorrectly, and then you can repair them before it's too late, because bad habits are harder to fix than good habits. So the sooner you pick up these things, the better your whole technique will improve. Now, having done that vertical palm strike, we then go back to the exercise of strengthening the wrist and forearm. We make sure the elbow is locked and do a nice, big, relaxed circle knot, flip, open it up, full rotation as far as you can take it. When it can't go any further, make the fist and pull the elbow straight back. Now, we don't just dismiss that and say, let's move on to the next part. That's crucial in itself, because a lot of people do this. They drop and come up. That's making your arm travel in a circle. That's not a straight line. That's not the most direct line. What we want to practice here is the most likely elbow strike you'll ever use. You may not get much opportunity to do elbows this way, or any other weird, wonderful way. But this one is very possible, because if you ever grab from behind, it's one of the most basic ways to break the grab, to damage somebody's ribs. So in the form, hundreds, if not thousands of times in your training, you're going to be doing that action. So you want to be doing it properly, so you've trained it, so that if you are grabbed from behind, what to you seems like a simple thing in the form, suddenly becomes an incredibly powerful weapon that can damage somebody's ribs and change their whole relationship to you in the fight, because suddenly they can't breathe. One of my seniors in Wing Chun, Barry Lee, many years ago we heard the story that he had a friend in karate came around and they were messing around, and his friend grabbed him from behind, and without even thinking, Barry just put that on, thought he'd done it fairly lightly, and broke 3 of his friend's ribs. Apparently the guy didn't really feel very happy to train with him much more after that, because he felt it was a bit excessive, yet the technique itself was not applied. I'm sure he didn't line it up and scream and do all the rest. He was just boom. But because he'd done that thousands and thousands of times correctly, it had the desired effect. 3 broken ribs. So if you think about it, if you're testing your technique all the time, making sure it's accurate, there's a built-in insurance policy that's ready to use all the time. It's probably the one technique you do more than any other. It's only one technique that rivals that in the number of times you do it, and that's this one. The wrist circling. They're the techniques that you see all the time in all the forms. Circling the wrists, elbows coming back in a straight line. That's why later in the form, and I'll emphasise it when I get there, even if we're doing a low technique, we come back up to shoulder level before we pull the elbow back. And not, as most others do it from there. Because if they're doing it from there, they're going up. They're using the wrong kind of action. So they're not going to develop the elbow strike as powerfully as if they do it from here and make it drop backwards. It's the reverse angle of the punch. If it's powerful in that direction, it can also be powerful in the opposite direction. So when you're doing your elbow actions from now on, think about that. Don't just take it for granted, anything we do. Tidy it up. Keep it close to your body. Pull it back loosely with a bit of spring to it. And just remember what you just saw then. If that's somebody's ribs, you practiced putting a hole in them. Right? Making your opponent do that nice sound that you want to hear in the middle of the fight. Because when you hear the sound, you know you're doing something right. If you don't hear that, it might be time to run. Now, any questions? Because that's the end of the first section of the form, and I will give you a break. That's the difficult section of the form anyway. It's always the one that takes the most.